Here at the John Strong Mansion, our collection has a significant emphasis on fiber arts. One of the reasons that this is the case is that back in the day, if you wanted to have fabric for anything, you pretty much had to make yourself. A little bit later on, during the Industrial Revolution, there was the option to purchase machine-made fabric, but at least initially that was very expensive. On the John Strong farm, there were two types of fiber production. One was with flax, and the other one was with wool. Because we have so many collection items that center around wool fabric production, I thought it was appropriate to do my presentation on this particular section. If you want wool fabric, what do you have to do first? Your first step is an annual chore on any farm that has sheep, and that is shearing. In order to shear your sheep, you need to get them down off a pasture and somewhere closer to the house or into a sheep barn. Every year, sheep are sheared so that they don't get uncomfortable, because sheep wool does not normally shed naturally. And it's just like the hair on your head. If you don't clip it, it gets too long, it gets in your way, and in the middle of the summer, you're going to get really uncomfortable. Back in our time period, the shearing of sheep was usually done with large clippers that looked a lot like scissors. As you can see, the clippers were held to the bottom of the sheep's wool strand, and the wool was removed down close to the skin. The next step was that wool that was stained with poop, that had big brambles in it, that was severely matted, would be removed from the fleece, and this process is called skirting. Way back in the day, skirting would have probably been done on the ground, but you will also see it being done on something called a skirting table, which is what you see here. The fleece would have been laid flat and picked through by hand, which is actually, I understand, still done today. Your next step is to wash the wool. It would have had to have been very gentle. What they do is that they take warm water and some good soap and get it all wet. They quite literally give that skirted fleece a bath. The idea is to remove the dirt and the grease, and once it has been washed, the wool is laid out to dry. Within this process, it would have been put into some sort of a basin of water, so that the wool wouldn't turn into a big matted mess. Once the washed wool has been dried, it's clean, but you really can't spin it yet. It looks something like what you see on the picture here. Technically, that's actually adult mohair, but you get the idea. The fibers are grouped together very tightly. They're sort of tangled together. They're really hard to separate by hand like you would need to for spinning. There has to be a better way to get this taken care of, and that process is called carding. You can prepare wool for spinning by using one of these. In the picture, you will see that there is a carding brush. This is actually a fully modern one, but the antiques would have looked very similar. A piece of wood with a handle and a bunch of tines coming up, and those just act like the comb on your hair would. It pulls through, removes the tangles, and straightens it out. You can use one carder, or you can use two of them. In the modern era, there's also something called a drum carder, but that is more recent. Once you have carded your wool, it might look like this, and this is what is called roving, and it is the simpler form of processed fiber because it's longer and it's skinnier, and it's a little bit easier to spin with. The other option is a bat, and that's what you see here. It's a lot more, it would probably remind a non-spinner of a cotton ball. And if you were to unwind a cotton ball, you would get something very similar to what you see here. And from here, my friend Laura Benjamin is going to tell you about how the spinning wheel is used.
My name is Laura Benjamin, and I'm going to be talking about the spinning wheel and how it came to be and its importance to us as DAR members. So, long, long ago, about 50,000 years ago, some Neanderthal guy was trying to make twine, and he had some strips of plant fiber, and he was doing like this. He was rolling it and rolling it to make a little bit of yarn, kind of like that. But then he had to keep it, so he wound it around a stick and added it to the stick some more. Now, down the line, about 20,000 years ago, somebody decided to put a lump of clay or something like that on the bottom of the stick. And the reason for that is because he wanted to make the stick do the winding. So, very simply, the twist makes it hold together better, and then you just wind it onto the stick. So this is very easy. Now, while we were winding it onto the stick, thinking, gee whiz, there's got to be a better way, somewhere around 500 to 1000 AD, somebody out in Asia decided that we could do a better job by taking it out of people's hands and putting it up against the wheel. Is that they got this wheel and they put the spindle to the wheel, and then they would turn the wheel and that would turn the spindle. Now that was okay, but it was a little clumsy because that wheel was very big. That wheel was this big or something, and that's called a walking wheel. It spun a spindle just like Sleeping Beauty, okay? And spindles really aren't that sharp, but they're sharp enough to get you if you're bewitched. So, the walking wheel, you would stand there with it, and then you would stretch your yarn as you walked back. And then as you gave it slack, it would wind up. So that was the walking wheel. Next, about right around 1600, people figured out to make them smaller, and they put the spindle here, and this had a plank. there was one treadle underneath, and you could put a distaff, a big stick, to hold the plant fiber, usually flax fiber from linen. That worked for a couple of years, and then people decided that they would rather have this arrangement with a little bit of drag and a bit of bobbin, and they could spin and have it feed onto a bobbin. Then they could get the two bobbins together and put the two yarns together and make a twisted yarn, which is even more durable. And they could do all this faster than you could do it with a spindle. Now, there are still people who spin for weaving. They tend to have everybody in the village spinning at some time or another. Old men, little kids, everybody. They're all spinning and spinning and spinning. That's how you get textile production in a primitive environment. But we were talking Middle Ages in Europe, and they were all interested in doing this. Early modern man came up with this thing, and it spread like wildfire. So right around 1533, they started making these fairy tale spinning wheels. And then a few years later, they added this cute little thing. It's called a flyer and a bobbin. Now, that all worked out very well. And that style of spinning wheel was really good for both wool and for flax. So it was very popular, and it stayed popular. They still make them today. I have, a modern wheel because it has ball bearings and stuff like that. I don't have to oil everything every 20 minutes, and that's good for me. But we have this. I have a spinning wheel now, and it makes yarn a whole lot faster and easier. And I can do this the same way that a walking wheel person does, by taking some carded wool and stretching it out and putting it on there. This is real wool. It's been washed, and in the olden days they just sort of fluffed it and then spun it, and I'm no good at that. So I've carded this, and it's a lot fluffier, but it's not real organized. So let's see if I can make some yarn with this. I'm going clockwise. Interestingly enough, that Neanderthal gentleman was going clockwise, and then when he spun the three cords together to make a twine, he went anti-clockwise so that he wouldn't end up with a mess. So there we go. Now, if you were on a walking wheel, you'd want to do that. Except a whole lot more. You let that get twisted, and then you could walk with, I'm going to break. So, there we go. Anyway, that's basically how we make really crappy yarn. There is also wool that is arranged better, or differently anyway. You see how fuzzy this yarn is. Here we go. Now, when my castle wheel here is a different style from the flax wheel that I was talking about, the one that was laying straight out like that. And this was pretty much a Scottish and Northern English wheel. It was used exclusively for wool. There are not too many of those came over originally during the colonial period. Most of them were flax type wheels with a distaff on them. And the distaff was basically a big stick with kind of a cage arrangement on the top. And the big stick held flax fiber, because that's, I guess it's a little tricky to manage any other way. You just pull it down as you needed and feed the flax into the system and get yarn out of it. They also made linsey woolsey, as you may have heard of. They would mix the linen and the wool. And they got good at spinning for weaving, which they could also do. Now, that's interesting that back in the colonial times, Britain did not allow certain technologies out of the kingdom proper. So you couldn't bring textile equipment to the colonies. What they did was they had guys who knew how to build multiple spinners, spinning jennies, smuggle them out of the country and into the colonies so that they could build these things. It was highly illegal, and people would get really in trouble if they got caught. But smuggling was big business for the colonies. However, individual spinning wheels were not considered to be a danger to the textile industry. And small looms were not a danger to the textile industry. So they let these ladies come over with their household equipment, which was a spinning wheel and perhaps a loom. Looms were often run by men, but you know, we had them both. And spinning wheels were standard equipment for a household. So by the time of the Revolution, you had an awful lot of spinning wheels in the country, most of them fairy tale looking spinning wheels with excuse me, with the distaff. And that's what our spinning wheel and distaff logo represents. It shows the distaff underneath in kind of a silvery metal and the wheel on top. Now, wheels were often spoked. Mine is solid, but they were often made with spokes. Our wheel is 13 spokes for the 13 colonies and a whole load of stars around the edge. It was there partly because the women during the Revolution used to have spinning bees because they needed revolutionary uniforms. So women in a community would get together and have a spinning party and just spin all day and eat cookies and gossip and have a great time. We still have spinning parties. And then all the yarn would go to a weaver who would make uniforms. So that is pretty much why we have a spinning wheel, is because it was a communal work that women did in support of the Revolution. That's pretty much it. We have spinning wheels today. You can see a modern example. We have many other wheels, still look like the original ones that the colonists came over with. And people kept the spinning wheels going all across the country as they settled out in the remote areas where they couldn't get at things. they took their spinning wheels and wove some and knitted some and uh, kept the folks fed and clothed. So a few of us crazy people wanted to keep this up, and so we get spinning wheels and get into groups and just have a good time. I do spin, knit, and weave, and it's a good experience. So basically, that is what I have to say, and I thank you for your attention.
Once the yarn has been spun and placed onto bobbins, as you saw Laura do, the yarn has to be removed from those bobbins, and it is wound into a skein for storage. At the John Strong Mansion, we have a skein winder of a particular type that is upright on its own 2 feet, and those are called weasels. A weasel is intended to pop after a certain number of turns of the wheel, and when it pops, the assembly no longer spins. The popping sound is where we get the rhyme, pop goes the weasel. The reason why it would pop after a certain number of rotations is that this would tell the person doing the winding how many yards were going to be in each skein. And whether you're doing a knitting project or a weaving project, or I know this is modern, but a crochet project, you have to know how many yards of yarn you have prior to starting the project. And so this is how that was accomplished back then. It would, after that, be removed from the weasel and twisted into a yarn skein. So once you have your yarn in your skeins, you can make it into cloth. And one of the most stunning examples of cloth that we have here at the mansion is a linsey woolsey, which was made here on the farm. And as you can see, it is an intricate blue and white pattern that the blue is actually the wool that has been dyed with indigo, and the white is actually linen. So it's beautiful. We could also use it to make other kinds of cloth. And originally all wool cloth used on the farm would have been knitted or woven from yarn that was made this way. The process for flax is a little bit different, but you would still make yarn and then weave it from there.
We make yarn, not string, and I don't have a distaff because I don't use flax, and I would be able to deal with the wool pretty much without a distaff by either tearing it into manageable bits or just handling it in a certain way. So there are plenty of tricks for wool people. Um, I'm sorry, I don't know any of the flax at all. I've never spun it. Now, if when I finish loading this bobbin, then I would switch to a second bobbin and put some more on that bobbin. When I have 2 bobbins, I can put them on a couple of dowels, and load them together and spin them in the other way. And for that reason, see, what I want to do is come out with a sample that's kind of like this. Okay. What I could get if I went the same way is a sample like that. It'd make a great scrunchie, but it's really rubbish for the arm. Where I get my wool is mostly online. I get mostly what they call top, which is combed wool. And they do this on large machines and then pull the combed wool together into kind of a long rope of unspun yarn or wool. And to spin it, I usually break it down. If I want very thin, I will break it down to very thin strips. And that way I don't have to pull quite so much to get a smaller yarn. If I wanted fat, then I would do this and still pull it, but you would get a much fatter yarn. Raw wool at a sheep and wool show, like the Vermont Sheep and Wool Show in Tunbridge. They'll sell you a whole fleece, and then you get to clean it, and yeah, you get to clean it and pick the grass out of it. And then you come up with, if you have hand cards, you pick up, you can make this. Or if you have combs, you can make your own one of these. I acquired my wheel online from a gentleman in East Haven. Not East Haven, next town down, East Burke. And he had it drop shipped from New Zealand where they're made. And this one is Magicraft. There are two major makers, Ashford and Magicraft in New Zealand. And they have an awful lot of sheep there, and so, a lot of call for spinning wheels. And Magicraft makes only tassel wheels, basically. The Ashford also makes the flax model wheel, or the flax/wool model wheel, but I don't think they make distaff. Other wheel makers are Kromsky of Poland. There's one in Colorado, Schacht, and Dutch one, Louet, and plenty of others. There's an expensive one I think is called Jensen, and I've never seen one. Mine has two treadles. That's a very recent development and costs a little more. Most spinning wheels still have a single treadle, like they did in the colonial times and before. The treadle mechanism came from Germany in about 1533. This one folds so that I can carry it around. Many of them don't, but this one does. And I can get it into a bag and carry it over my shoulder sometimes. I do that in conferences and stuff like that. But just around the house or to the car or something like that. It's about 15 pounds and it's easy enough to carry.